This video is going to be a little bit different than my other videos. I've been looking in on the YouTube analytics, and it kind of shows me that of the few people that do watch my videos, a lot of them watch only a few seconds and maybe like 30-40 seconds, and they skip to the back. They want to see the final result. They're not all that interested in the the details of how I make stuff. And that's actually different than how I watch videos, because I started making videos of a kind that I watch. The kind where people make things and I look at that, I get ideas, and potentially make something like it, or maybe something that I think is better. And that's the nature of what I try to do. So in this particular case, we're going to start with the final result, which is right here. This is the knife that I've made for my wife for Christmas. I'm not going to post this video until she has it. The rest of the video, I've tried to eliminate some of the repetitive elements, some of the details that people may not find interesting, but if you want to see how I made this knife, you can continue watching. And of course, if you do watch my videos, I would love to hear from you. I'd like to hear your opinion on the format. Should it be more detail, less detail? Do you like the final result being showcased at the beginning? Or should I just show the process of making something and only show the final result at the end? Well, my wife's been asking me to make her a knife for a while, and given that it's Christmas, I figure if I'm ever going to do this for her, it's going to be now. I'm going to start with a little of Daikin Blue to transfer the design onto steel. Once it's dry, I can transfer the design onto the knife. I save 3D printed templates of all the knives that I made, and this is the knife that my wife wants. It's ready, and I'm going to cut it out on the Portaband. Since this knife is going to have a brass bolster, I'm going to go with brass pin stock as well. And for these two holes, which will secure the bolster, I'm going to go with a 7/32 stock. This hole over here is going to have a figure pin, 7/32. And down at the bottom here, I'm going to put in a lanyard hole, so I'm going to use this brass tube with 5/16. So those are the holes I have to drill. 2 3/32, 1 7/32, and 1 5/16. If you were seeking thrill and excitement of holes being drilled, I guess you can watch one of my other videos. You can trust me, I did drill these holes, although it wasn't without an adventure. The 15 and 20 steel that I get from the supplier doesn't come fully annealed. So it was at about 50 HRC, which means that the small holes I was able to drill just fine, but when it came to the large holes, I managed to completely dull out one of the drill bits, resharpen it, dulled it again, tested the steel, realized it, and annealed it, which is why the blue is gone. But that's fine, I have to reapply it for the next phase anyway. But in any case, the holes are drilled. I'm going to move on to grinding the bevels and grinding the faux edge back here. But before I do that, I have to mark it up. The thickness of the material I'm using is 125 thousandths of an inch, which means if I set the gauge to 50 thousandths of an inch, I'm going to have the distance between the scribe lines of 25 thousandths of an inch, which I think is roughly what I want. So that's what I'm going to do. Now that the height gauge is set, I'm going to fix it in place, and I'm going to test scribe my lines back in the area where I don't need them. And I don't know if this focuses, but that's pretty much what I'm looking for. So now I'm going to scribe it in the areas that are relevant. And here we go. That part is ready. Now I'm going to use a 3D printed template to mark where my handle is going to be when everything is finished on both sides. Here we go. And finally, I'm going to use the dividers to set roughly where my bells are going to be. And that looks pretty good right here. That's what I'm going to shoot for with my bevels. And then finally, my faux edge will go about here. Those are my markings. So now I'm prepared to start grinding. Some guys are great at freehanding their bevels. I'm not one of them. That's why I'm going to use my jig. It's pretty crudely made, but reasonably effective. And using some basic geometry, given some measurements here, I can figure out that I need an angle of 15 degrees. So I'm going to zero it right here, and then once I attach it to here, I need to aim for here we go. I got my angle set. Now I'm ready to rock and roll. For the actual bevels, not for the faux edge, which is done here, but for the real bevel, I've done the same math, and my math tells me that my angle should be 5 degrees. So I'm going to use my digital angle measuring thingy, zero it out, attach it to my blade, and then I'm going to go down from 15 all the way down to, oops, all the way down to 5. Or as close to 5 as I can reasonably get. And math don't fail me now. Skipping all the boring grinding stuff, it's coming along fine. It's time now to lighten the handle portion of it, but before I do that, I would like to at least rough out the brass bolster. So this way I'll know how far I need to drill handle, the drill holes. I'll be making the bolster out of this 1/4 inch brass stock, and it's going to be just about the right width, and I'm going to use maybe 3/4 of an inch of brass on this. I don't want to use too much, so I'm going to cut that and start shaping it. I've aligned the two pieces of brass and attached them together with masking tape. This is just temporary to hold the alignment correctly, and now I'm just going to put a drop of Crazy Glue in the middle, and that should be sufficient to keep this together for all the operations I need to perform on them. I'm going to be generous with Crazy Glue. It comes apart later pretty easily. So here we go. It will squeeze out. The excess will squeeze out. And now I'm just going to clamp it for a few seconds until the glue sets. That's it. Once the glue sets, I'm going to flatten out this edge as perfectly as I can. I only really need one flat edge. It doesn't really matter how misaligned they may be in other dimensions, as long as I have one flat edge. This is where the other handle material will mate to, so it needs to be perfectly matched. Now I have my perfectly matched up surface. I can continue. At this point in the process, I certainly don't want to scribe onto the steel anymore, so this piece of masking tape helps me to put my marks where I need them without marking up my nicely polished steel. So this is going to help me to properly position my bolster material, and I'm going to position it with a little bit, give me a little bit of leeway, like about so. With the bolster material aligned to the blade, I'm going to use the blade as the guide and just mark the position of one of the holes. This mark is the only thing I need. Now that I have the mark, I can take this to my drill press and drill out this one hole. With the single hole drilled, I use one of the pins to align and fix my blade in the position, and I'll mark the second hole. Now once again I'm going to go back to my drill press and drill this hole through both layers of material. Now both holes are drilled and pins perfectly aligned, and they will align once I sandwich the blade between the two halves of the bolster as well. I know that a lot of people advise against this and it doesn't work for them. I'm not sure why it works for me, but it does, and so that's the method that I use. Now that the bolster positioning is determined, I can do a couple of things. First, I'm going to mark the bolster for when I'm roughing it out. So I'm going to scribe on brass here. And the second, I can mark on my masking tape where the bolster ends, and this is where I'm going to stop drilling my holes for lightening of the handle of the knife. Well, the handle is now fully skeletonized. I do not know why I dislike this part of the process so much, but I do consider that once we're at this point that's over the hump. That's where I generally know I'm going to finish the knife, because once I'm done skeletonizing, everything from here is downhill. This actually is ready for a heat treat. So I'm going to fire up my mini forge and I will heat treat this knife. This mini forge is another one of my creations. It's tiny, but it does the job that I need it to do. Let's light it up. And I'm ready to get the knife going. The advantage of a small forge is that I think it warms up a lot faster than a larger forge. In any case, that's what I think, or maybe that's how I justify my envy of larger forges. And it's only going to take a couple of minutes for the knife blade to come to temperature. It's almost there. The tip is actually a little bit hot, so I'm gonna keep it deeper in the forge. We're almost there. Here we go. And now that the blade's been tempered and I've removed most of the scale, let's see where we stand with the hardness. I'm going to start at 55. I don't think I tempered it down that far. Let's take a look. Yeah, 55 still doesn't bite. It should be somewhere between 60 and 65, I would guess. Let's take a look. Nope, that still doesn't bite. Yeah, now the 65 is just starting to bite, so I did manage to temper it down a little bit, down to somewhere between 60 and 65, which is pretty good. Now let's clean it up, polish it up, and we can start working on a handle. Now that my blade is prepared and polished up, and my bolster pieces are also prepared and polished on the surface is going to be in contact with the blade, which is where I'm going to have a tough time polishing anything later on, I'm going to attach the bolsters using the brass pins, and I will also put some epoxy in there as well. Now the primary holding mechanism here are the pins, and I'm going to pin them, and the bolster is going to be held on mechanically. The epoxy is here strictly for protective purposes, so that no moisture gets in between the bolster and the steel and start corroding. So that is why I want a layer of epoxy in there. Other than that, it's all going to be mechanically held together. In this case, I feel comfortable using 5-minute epoxy, since, as I said, it's really not holding anything together, strictly there for protective purposes. Now I'm going to clean up the remaining epoxy as best as I can with acetone. Again, as I said, I'll pay particular attention to the pin areas. Let it clamp for good measure. And clean up some more epoxy that's squeezed out of there. I have trimmed and peened the pins, and the epoxy is now dry. And now I'm just going to clean up these raised area a little bit on the grinder. I'm not going to fully shape it yet, just do a little bit of cleanup. A little bit more time on the grinder, and the bolster is now flush with the steel. And at this point, I'm ready to attach the rest of the handle and shape everything. The handle material for my wife's knife comes from my wife. This was one of several knife making related Christmas presents. With one scale clamped securely and flush with the bolster, I'm going to once again use the blade as the guide, the steel as the guide, and I'm going to start the hole with my hand drill. However, as before, I'm going to complete this operation on the drill press. With a single pin attaching the blade to the scale, I once again clamp it, and once again will mark the location of the hole for the second pin using the handle as a guide and using hand drill. And now once again I'm going to take this to my drill press. With both pins now fixing the scale material to the blade, I can now trace my scale, and this is going to be the shape that I will cut out. Now I'm going to repeat this on the other side of the blade. My scales and my pins are cut, and everything is ready to be glued up. And for this operation I will use the 2-ton epoxy, not a 5-minute epoxy. Mere seconds have passed in the YouTube world, but here in the real world it's been long enough for the epoxy to dry. So now it's time to start shaping this handle. And the first thing I'm going to do is clean off the excess pins sticking out, and then trim the handle material to the steel handle. I'm not exactly sure what this material is, but it's definitely some sort of synthetic epoxy, possibly fiber-based, so I'm not going to take any chances, and I'm going to protect myself. Now I've trimmed the excess pin stock and profiled the handle to the steel underneath, and I've sketched out a profile for the handle that I think is going to be comfortable. Now I'm going to shape that and then move on to hand sanding of the handle.